I'm Selena. I always thought betrayal would come loud like shouting or breaking glass or a slammed door. Instead, it came quietly like steam slipping out of a cracked window, like a knife pressing against skin so gently you don't realize it's pierced until you're bleeding. I never expected to be betrayed by my own mother and sister, but that's what happened. And now, when I think about my father, all I feel is silence, the kind of silence that follows after something is ripped away from you and you can't even scream because it happened so slow you didn't notice until it was already gone. My name is Selena. I'm 28 years old, and a few months ago I buried the only person in my family who ever truly saw me, my father. He wasn't a rich man, not in the traditional sense, but he worked hard his whole life, saved everything he could, and loved me with the kind of honesty I thought could never be taken for granted. He had one apartment before he married my mother. A small but decent flat in a quiet part of the city. He always called it his safety net, and when I turned 25, he told me it would be mine one day, no matter what happened. He promised that after he died, something shifted in the house, not immediately, not with yelling or chaos, but something colder. My mother didn't cry, not once, at least not in front of me. Leela, my younger sister, stayed quiet too, always tapping her phone, staring at screens, and avoiding my eyes. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed we were all grieving in our own ways, but then little things started to disappear. Papers my father kept in his desk, old documents, boxes that had been stored in the back closet for years, things I knew he valued suddenly gone. And when I asked my mother, she shrugged, said she was cleaning up, getting rid of unnecessary clutter. My father had been organized, meticulous, even he kept records of everything. I remembered seeing the title deed for the apartment the last time he had me visited with him. He even showed me the spare keys and said, "This is yours now, keep it safe." But when I searched his files, the deed was nowhere to be found. Neither were the keys or the letters he used to write for me, things he always left tucked away in drawers or between books, just vanished. The day I really understood what was happening, I was at the local land registry office. I had gone there hoping to get a copy of the deed, maybe find out if anything had been filed under my name. Instead, the clerk pulled up the record, looked at the screen, and said, "Oh yeah, this was transferred last month. New owner's name is Leela." I remember my mouth going dry, my hands shaking as I asked him to repeat it. He did without even flinching, as if it were just another routine transaction, because to him it was, but to me it was everything. The apartment my father had promised me had been legally signed over to my younger sister just weeks after his death. I couldn't understand it. How could he have signed anything after he died? The clerk said the documents were notarized, said everything checked out, said there were no signs of forgery, but I knew something was wrong. The dates didn't add up, the signatures looked too perfect to clean, like someone had traced them or copied them with unnatural precision. That night, I confronted my mother. I didn't shout, I just asked her, "When did Dad decide to give Leela the apartment, and why wasn't I told?" Her expression didn't change. She didn't blink. She simply said, "We all have to make sacrifices, and Leela needed a stable place to live more than you do. Selena, don't be selfish." I remember that word selfish echoing in my head over and over like a bad dream. I asked her how could she do that knowing what Dad promised me, and she looked at me with a smile that wasn't really a smile and said, "Promises don't mean anything after death." Leela didn't say anything, just stood behind, her arms crossed, eyes avoiding mine, like she was ashamed or afraid, or maybe just guilty. I left that house that same night, packed a small bag, and walked out. I didn't even know where I was going, just that I couldn't breathe in that house anymore, not with them, not with that betrayal hanging in the air like a poison. I stayed in a cheap motel for a week, barely sleeping, replaying everything in my mind over and over, trying to understand how they did it, when they planned it, how deep the lies went, and if my father ever suspected any of it. I wanted to believe he didn't, that he died believing his wishes would be honored, that his daughter would be protected, not robbed by the people who shared her blood. Started investigating quietly, talking to people who knew my family, checking old records, emails, anything I could find. It wasn't easy, but slowly the pieces came together. I discovered that weeks before his death, my father had been pressured into signing several documents, some of them related to his will, others related to property. He had been sick, weak, confused, and he trusted the people around him to do the right thing. My mother used that trust, and so did Leela. They took advantage of a dying man and twisted his last days into a legal mess that left me with nothing. But I didn't scream, I didn't go to the police, I didn't post about it online or try to shame them publicly. Instead, I stayed quiet, because some wars are not won with noise, some are won with patience. I began gathering proof, recording conversations, collecting messages, anything that could show intent, show manipulation, show the ugly truth behind their perfect paperwork. I met with lawyers, quietly explained the situation, carefully presented my evidence, and wait. During that time I rebuilt myself. I worked long hours, saved every penny, and stayed in the shadows like a ghost, watching them from afar. I saw Leela move into the apartment, redecorate, repaint, act like she had earned it, like it was always hers, and I watched my mother visit her regularly, always bringing groceries, smiling, laughing like they had won, like I had disappeared. They thought I was weak because I didn't fight back right away, because I didn't scream or beg or cause a scene, but they didn't know me, not really, because I am my father's daughter, and he taught me that real strength is silent and steady, and when it finally moves it doesn't stop until everything in its path is shattered. The day I filed the lawsuit was quiet, like every other day. I wore a plain black coat, walked into the courthouse, and handed over the documents to my attorney, who nodded without a word and began the process. I had all the records, all the forged documents, all the text messages and audio files showing how they planned it, how they lied, how they stole everything from Muan. They were served with the court summons. My mother called me for the first time in months. Her voice was cold, distant. She said, "Are you really going to do this, Selena?" And I said, "No, I'm just getting started." Then I hung up. Lila sent me a message asking why I was being so cruel, as if I had betrayed them, not the other way around. I didn't reply because there was nothing left to say. Their actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. No, I wait, not passively, not helplessly, but with purpose, because the system takes time and justice moves slowly, but it moves. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock, it breaks down the door. I don't know if they regret what they did. I don't know if they even understand it, but I know this: I will get back what was mine, not just the apartment, but my father's truth, his honor, his name. And when I do, I won't go back, I won't forgive, and I won't forget, because some betrayals are too deep to calculated, too cruel to ever be washed away. And this time, I am not the girl who walked out of that house with her suitcase in silence. At this time, I am the storm that's coming back for everything. I stopped counting the days after the 50th because numbers no longer meant anything to me. Time had turned into something fluid, like a fog I couldn't escape. I spent most of my hours in silence, not out of grief anymore, but strategy. I knew that every emotion I had left could be used against me if I gave in to anger. If I made a wrong move, they would twist it as proof that I was unstable or bitter or just another woman obsessed with Monet. So I became someone else, or at least I pretended to the old version of me, the one who laughed in the kitchen with my father, who believed family meant something. She was gone, buried alongside him. Now there was only the version of me that read legal texts for hours, who took notes at 3 in the morning, who watched my mother and sister from a distance like a stranger. Started at the notary public office. I remembered the name from one of the stamped pages at the registry office. The man was in his early 60s with a kind face, too kind for someone who helped steal from a dead man. I waited until his office was empty before walking in, said I was there to verify a document for my father's old estate. He didn't recognize me, not right away, so I asked him gently if he remembered signing off on a property transfer for my father shortly before his death. He smiled and nodded, said yes, I remember that family. Very polite. Mother and daughter came in very well prepared, all the papers in order. That sentence, very well prepared, stayed with me like a stain. They had planned it down to the smallest detail. They had walked into his office, come smiling, composed, with a folder full of lies, and he had believed them, because why wouldn't he? He had no reason not to. He offered to pull up a copy of the notarized files, and I watched as he clicked through his computer screen and printed everything without hesitation. He even let me keep the copies. Thanked him and left, but as soon as I got outside my legs shook and I had to sit down. The papers were almost perfect, clean signatures, legal formatting, no typos, no inconsistencies. It looked professional, which is what made it suspicious. My father's handwriting had always been rough, awkward, especially when he was sick. The signature on the deed was flawless, not a tremble, not a skip in ink. It was not his hand. The more I looked, the more I saw it. The way the pen pressure was too even, the angle of the letters, the absence of his usual initials in the corner. My father always signed his full name but added a small S.J. at the end like a habit from his youth. There was no S.J., just the name in bold black ink, like someone printed it from memory. Took the documents to a handwriting analyst, someone who didn't ask questions. The woman examined the signatures side by side with my father's older documents, nodded slowly, said the one on the transfer didn't match, the baseline strokes were different. She couldn't say for sure it was forged unless I got an official investigation started, but she was willing to testify if Nadady felt something tighten in my chest, not pain, not grief, but a slow, dangerous resolve, because now I had confirmation that what I felt wasn't paranoia, it was real, and now I had to keep going. Visited the hospital next, the place where my father died. I requested the times of admission and his condition in the last 72 hours of his life. According to the nurse records, he was unconscious for most of it, heavily sedated with high-dose medication, which made it impossible for him to walk into any office or sign anything legally. I made copies of everything, labeled and filed each document like a weapon waiting to be used. The very night I would go back to my tiny apartment, sit at the same desk, and put everything into place: voice recordings, emails, printed screenshots, all in a binder that grew thicker each week. It became my obsession, but also my protection, because I knew that when the time came, I would need to show more than emotion. I would need undeniable facts. At some point, I realized I needed more than paperwork. I needed people who saw what happened, people who might not know the whole truth, but enough to raise questions. I started with extended relatives. My mother's sister and Carol lived 3 hours away and was always considered the black sheep of the family, not because she did anything wrong, but because she refused to go along with the rest. She had a sharp tongue and a sharper memory. I called her, said I needed to talk, and she told me to come right away, no questions. When I arrived, she didn't hug me, just looked me in the eye and said, "I've been wondering when you'd show up." Then she poured tea and sat down like she had been waiting for this conversation her whole life. I told her everything, what I suspected, what I had found, what I knew, and what I couldn't prove, and she listened without interrupting. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of letters from my father, old letters, handwritten and mailed over the years. She said he always sent her updates about me, about the apartment, about his plans. She handed me one dated 3 weeks before his death. In it, he wrote that he was finalizing the paperwork to ensure I would receive the apartment. He was concerned about my mother's influence and asked Carol to keep a copy just in case. He held that letter in my hands like a key to a locked door. Everything clicked into place. They knew what he planned and they moved fast before he could finish. They took advantage of his condition and faked the ending before the ink could dry on his real intentions. He scanned the letter, added it to the binder, made a digital backup, and then I asked Carol if she would testify if it came to that. She nodded, said, "Your father was a good man and I don't like liars." That was all. Nadady left her house with more than just evidence. I left with fire in my veins. I knew they thought I had disappeared. I knew they believed I was weak, but they didn't understand how quiet fury works. It doesn't burn fast, it doesn't explode, it grows slow, steady, focused, like ice that cuts deeper than flame. The following weeks, I kept my distance from them, but watched their movements. Leela had started posting photos of herself in the apartment, pictures with captions about new beginnings and independence. I screenshot every post, every timestamp. Meanwhile, my mother was boasting in her social circles about managing my father's estate, how difficult it had been, how she had handled everything on her own. Found people who heard those words, people willing to write statements and send me voice memos. The picture was forming not just of legal betrayal but of a coordinated effort to erase me from his legacy. and pretend it never happened. They wanted me gone and forgotten, and instead they gave me purpose filed a legal request for a formal handwriting analysis under my attorney's name and included the hospital records as evidence that my father could not have signed anything that day. The court approved the request and set a hearing date 6 weeks from then. I didn't call my mother or sister to tell them they would find out soon enough when the summons arrived. 6 weeks to wait, 6 weeks to breathe, to prepare, to remember why I was doing this, not just for the apartment but for the truth, because no one should be able to rewrite someone's final wishes out of greed and manipulation, and I would not let them win. I used to think the hardest part of betrayal was the moment it happened, the shock of it, the sting, but I was wrong. The hardest part comes later, when you wake up weeks or months afterward and realize the people who broke you are still living like nothing happened, laughing, cooking, buying groceries, posting pictures, like the world didn't shift for you, like your pain was just a passing storm they watched from a window, then forgot. Didn't forget, I couldn't. Every time I walked past a window and saw the reflection of my face, I saw the version of me that left that house with a suitcase and no answers, and I promised her every single day that I would make this right, not just legally but personally, because what they did was not just theft, it was erasure. They didn't just take property, they rewrote my father's legacy, tore pages out of his story and replaced them with their own. The hearing was approaching. My attorney had warned me to prepare myself not just for the legal side but for the emotional ambush that would come when I saw them again. But I wasn't ready. No one ever is. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying childhood memories with them, memories that now felt fake, like props in a play I had been cast in without my consent. I started to question everything, every smile, every holiday, every I love you. Had it all been a performance? Had I ever really belonged to that family, or was I just a temporary piece they could remove when inconvenient? Went back to the apartment once, not inside, just stood across the street at night, watched as the light turned off in what used to be my father's study, my room, the one he said would always be mine. I saw Leela's shadow walk by, and for a moment I thought about calling her, yelling, telling her everything I had discovered, the forged papers, the witness statements, the handwriting expert, but I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't matter to her. She had already chosen her side. What surprised me more than anything was how calm I had become, not numb, just clear, like when a storm finally breaks and all that's left is the cold, still water. I didn't want revenge, I wanted correction. I didn't want to hurt them the way they hurt me. I just wanted the truth to be louder than their lies, and I wanted my father's voice to echo louder than their silence. In the days leading up to the court date, I started sorting through the last box I had left of my father's things. It had been taped shut since the funeral. I opened it slowly, expecting dust and sadness, but what I found stopped me. He had written me a letter dated only a month before his death, handwritten on yellow paper, the kind he used when he wanted to be personal. It said he was proud of me, said he trusted me, and said that no matter what happened, I should never let anyone take what was mine. He ended it with that little mark he always used, the S.J, and for the first time in weeks I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was finally seen again after being invisible for so long. That letter became my center. I made 3 copies, stored the original in a locked case, and gave one to my lawyer. It wasn't part of the official will, but it was powerful. A voice from the grave, clear and full of intent and emotion, and if nothing else, it would remind me why I started this. 3 days before the hearing, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize at first, but when I opened it, my breath caught. It was from someone who used to work with my father at his old job before retirement, a man named Hazen, who I remembered only vaguely from childhood. He said he had something I might want to see and attached a scanned document. It was a draft of a will dated shortly before my father's final hospitalization. In it, he had listed me as the sole inheritor of the apartment, along with a note that it was to be protected from interference. Called him immediately, asked him how he got it, and he told me my father had asked him to hold onto it as a backup in case things got complicated. He had forgotten about it until he heard from my aunt, who had apparently called him after our conversation. She was moving quietly, like me, working from the shadows and connecting dots I hadn't even seen. Now, I had more than just suspicion, I had a pattern. My father had taken steps to protect me not once but multiple times, and those steps had been blocked, hidden, erased by the same two people who now pretended to mourn him on holidays while enjoying the life they stole. I felt something settle in my chest, not pain, not fire, but something heavier, a weight that told me the next few days would change everything because the truth was now too loud to ignore and they would be forced to hear it whether they wanted to or not. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked for hours around the city, headphones and eyes forward, heart steady. Thought about all the times I had kept quiet out of respect or fear or love, and I realized none of those reasons applied anymore. Silence had served them, not me, and it was time to stop whispering. G sat at my desk one last time, reviewed every document, every timestamp, every file, and then I closed the binder and took a deep breath because whatever happened tomorrow, I had already won. In one way, I had found the truth and I had not let it die with him. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Too many tiles, too much light. I sat at the table across from them, my mother in her usual gray coat, Leela dressed like she was attending brunch. Not a hearing. Neither of them looked at me directly, not on. The judge read the summary and the evidence was presented in order: hospital records, expert analysis, the notarized discrepancies, and finally the letter my father wrote. My mother's face remained blank. Leela looked confused, like she hadn't been told the full plan, like she was only now realizing how deep this went. When my lawyer read my father's final words out loud, I watched their faces carefully. I expected anger, denial, but what I saw was worse: emptiness, like it didn't even register. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about misunderstanding or desperation. It was about control. They never believed I would fight. They never believed I was strong enough to come back, but I hadn't. I wasn't leaving until the truth had a voice louder than their silence. I once read that courtrooms are designed to make you feel small. The ceilings are high, the walls are wide, everything echoes, even the sound of your own breath. And maybe that's the point. Maybe they want you to feel like the system is bigger than you, like the truth is too far to reach. But as I sat there on the second day of the hearing, I didn't feel small. I felt present, grounded, steady, like every second of silence was an inch closer to justice. The judge had asked for more time to review the documentation, especially the letter from my father and the expert statements. It was standard. They said nothing to worry about, but I knew better. Delay always meant someone behind the scenes was trying to interfere, trying to change the story before it became permanent. He went home and locked every window. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but I knew enough now to trust my instincts when something felt off, and something was definitely off. 2 days later, I received a letter at my door. Not through mail, no envelope, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper placed under the mat. It said, "You're making a mistake. This won't end the way you think." And there was no signature. For a full minute, I just stared at it, wondering if this was supposed to scare me, if someone expected me to give up or run or back off. But instead, I felt colder, calmer. I folded the note and placed it inside my binder. Just another piece of proof that I was on the right track. He told my lawyer and he frowned. Said it was probably nothing, but we both knew better. Intimidation wasn't new. It was just the next step. When silence stopped working, I changed all my passwords, upgraded my phone, added a security system to my apartment. I wasn't going to let fear undo the work I had done. At the next hearing focused on the forgery. The analyst was brought in and she spoke clearly, confidently. She explained how the signature did not match my father's known handwriting, how the ink pattern showed signs of replication, not natural pressure, and how certain elements were missing, like the dot he always added after his initials. My mother's lawyer tried to dismiss it, said handwriting changes under stress and illness, but the medical records contradicted him. My father had been sedated, unconscious, unable to hold a pen, much less sign legal documents. The room was quiet as the evidence was laid out piece by piece, and I watched my mother's jaw tighten as the walls began to close in. What came next was worse, not legally but emotionally, because it wasn't about papers or witnesses. It was about me, my character, my choices, my life. They pulled up old photos of me with friends from years ago, tried to paint me as irresponsible, selfish, unstable. They even mentioned a short gap in my employment history as if that proved I wasn't trustworthy, as if being human made me less deserving of the truth. But I didn't flinch because I knew this tactic too. When they can't disprove your facts, they attack your image. I sat still and let them talk because the truth doesn't need volume, it needs consistency, and I had that in every page of that binder. Then the real shift came. My lawyer called Hazen, the man who had received the earlier version of the will my father had sent before he died. He confirmed everything: the date, the letter, the instructions, and he held up the scanned copy that matched my father's handwriting exactly. The room felt different after that, like something had cracked open and everyone knew it. My mother's face didn't change, but Leela looked at me for the first time since the hearing began. Really looked at me, and there was something in her eyes that almost looked like fear or regret. I couldn't tell, and I didn't care because whatever it was, it came too late. That night, I received another note again. No envelope, no name. It said, "Some things are better left buried." This time I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate, the kind of threat that comes from people who know they're losing. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, some part of the story I hadn't uncovered yet. And I was right, because the next morning I received a call from my Aunt Carol. Her voice was shaky. She said she had something I needed to hear. She played me a voicemail she had received from someone she used to work with years ago, a woman who had once done freelance paperwork for my mother quietly, discreetly. This woman had overheard a conversation between my mother and Leela not long after my father was hospitalized. They had discussed timelines, documents, signatures. They had been preparing this before he even died. The woman agreed to submit a written statement. I added it to my file. I was no longer building a case, I was unraveling a web, and at the center of it was my mother, calm, cold, calculated, and entirely unrepentant. But even now, the part that hurt the most wasn't what she did, it was how little she cared, how easily she erased me from every plan, every conversation, every legacy. She didn't just steal from me, she rewrote history and left me out of the book. He started having dreams, strange, fragmented dreams of my father walking through the apartment, sitting at the kitchen table writing notes and looking up at me with eyes full of worry. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he just nodded, and every time I woke up, I felt like he was telling me to keep going, to finish what I started. The next hearing would be the final one. The judge had reviewed everything and was preparing to rule. My lawyer said we were in a strong position, but nothing was certain, not with family, not with money, not with lies that were decades deep. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had crossed every line of doubt and pain and come out on the other side not untouched but unbroken. I was ready not just to hear the verdict but to accept whatever came, because I had told the truth in every breath, and I had done it without losing myself. And if that wasn't justice, didn't know what was. There are moments in life where everything slows down, not because time itself changes, but because your mind finally stops running. You stop checking your phone, you stop rehearsing what you'll say, you stop fearing what's next, and you just wait. Still ready, prepared. I sat in the courtroom like that on the day the judge read the verdict, hands still, eyes steady, heart quiet, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had nothing left to fear. I had given everything I had to the truth. Months of searching, documenting, remembering, replaying conversations I didn't want to remember, watching people I used to love lie to my face and pretending it didn't shatter me every time. I had no more energy to be angry, and that's when you know you've reached the end, when anger becomes too heavy and all you're left with is the need to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged. The judge's voice echoed across the room, steady, calm, detached. He began by outlining the facts, the inconsistencies, the testimonies, the expert statements, the timelines that didn't align, and the signatures that didn't match. He spoke of my father's condition, the days leading to his death, and the overwhelming evidence that he could not have lawfully signed away the apartment. Acknowledged the secondary will, the statements from witnesses, the letter from Hazen, and even the note my father had handwritten to me. And at that moment, I stopped breathing, just for a second, just long enough for silence to scream inside me. Then came the words I didn't know I needed to hearth. Court finds in favor of the plaintiff. That was a plain, simple, final bit. In that moment, everything shone. Leela gasped quietly and looked at my mother as if she had been expecting Something else, maybe a miracle or a twist that never came. My mother did not move, not a blink, not a shift, just still like someone who had lost a game but refused to leave the table. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just sat there taking in the silence the way it finally belonged to me. After months of sitting in it alone, I stood slowly, gathered my things, nodded at my lawyer, and walked past them both, not because I wanted them to see me, but because I wanted them to know they no longer had power over me. But it wasn't over, not yet. Days after the verdict, Leela showed up at my door, not yelling, not apologizing, just standing there, eyes red, voice small. She said she needed to talk. I didn't want to let her in, but I did, not for her but for me, because I needed to know what her silence had meant all these months. She said she never wanted things to go this far, that she thought our mother would fix everything, that she was scared, that she didn't know how to stop it once it started. She said she missed me, that she remembered when we were kids how I would braid her hair and read to her when she had nightmares, and that none of it had felt real since our father. Didi listened. I didn't say much because nothing she said could change what she did or what she allowed to happen. I told her she chose her side when it mattered and that choices have consequences. She started to cry and asked if I would ever forgive her, and I said maybe one day, but not now, not today. Later that night, I received an email from my mother, short, cold, direct. She said I had humiliated the family, that I had destroyed everything for a piece of property, and that I would regret it in time. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She was wrong. I hadn't done any of those things. She destroyed the family the moment she decided her control mattered more than love. She humiliated herself the moment she forged our father's name, and she would be the one left with regret, not me. I visited the apartment the next morning, keys in hand, papers and bags standing in front of the building my father once called his safety net. I walked through the hallway slowly, remembering each step, each crack in the wall, each chipped tile, and when I opened the door to what was now legally mine, I didn't cry. I just stood there, breathing in the quiety. Walked room to room, touching the windows, the furniture, the kitchen counter, like they were parts of a memory coming back into place, and for the first time in a long time, I felt still, not happy, not healed, but still. He opened the closet where my father used to keep his old records and found a box I hadn't seen before. Inside was a picture of him and me smiling, holding a small plant he had once planted in the apartment balcony. There was also a note, folded once, that simply read, "You are stronger then they think you are stronger than you know," and I believed it because I had faced them all and I had not disappeared. It's strange how quiet life becomes after a storm, not the kind of silence that feels empty or lonely, but the kind that settles deep into your bones like a breath you didn't know you were holding, finally being released for the first time in months. I woke up without that weight on my chest, without that anxious loop of thoughts that asked what if, what now, what next. I just opened my eyes and breathed, and for a while that was enough. The apartment didn't feel like mine at first, even though the papers said it was. The wall still remembered someone else's footsteps, the air still carried traces of my father's presence, and sometimes I would catch myself waiting to hear his voice calling me from the kitchen, asking if I wanted tea. I knew he was gone, but grief doesn't care about facts. It moves through you like a slow tide, and all you can do is let it carry you without drowning. He spent days cleaning, repainting, fixing broken cabinets. I kept the things that mattered, the bookshelf he built with his own hands, the old chair he used to read in, the plant from the balcony that somehow still lived despite everything. And little by little the space began to change, not because I made it mine, but because I stopped trying to make it his. People talk about closure like it's a finish line, something you cross and then move on, but I don't believe in that, not anymore. There's no closing the door on something that shaped you, no final scene, no curtain call. There's just a moment when you realize the pain isn't running the show anymore and you're finally standing on your own. Lila stopped calling after that day. I told her I needed space and she gave it to me, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of shame. I don't know. My mother didn't reach out again either, and I didn't expect her to. Whatever version of love she believed in was not something I wanted anymore. The woman who raised me no longer existed, not in the way I remembered, and I had to grieve That Tui started working again part-time at first, just enough to keep moving. I taught community classes in writing and communication skills, something small, something real, something that let me feel useful without having to explain where I had been or what I had survived. The people there didn't know my story, and I liked that they just saw me as someone who showed up on time and brought extra pens and smiled even when the coffee was bad. Sometimes when the class ended and the lights were off, I would sit by the window and look outside and wonder what my father would say if he saw me now. Would he be proud? Would he think I fought the right way? Would he forgive me for not knowing sooner, for not stopping it in time? I think he would, because he taught me to listen more than speak and to act more than argue, and I did both. One Maturdoni afternoon, I walked into the storage room of the apartment to put away a box of old files, and I found a small wooden crate I hadn't noticed before. Inside were cassette tapes labeled in his handwriting, years old, dusty, forgotten. I borrowed a player from a neighbor and listened for hours, and there it was, his voice, low, thoughtful, sometimes laughing, sometimes tired, talking about his days, his regrets, his hopes for me. He didn't know if I would ever find them, but he said, just in case, these are my truths. I cried then, not from pain but from gratitude. Not everyone gets a second chance to hear the voice of someone they lost. Not everyone gets to carry their memory in something so real, so raw, so intimate. I copied the tapes into digital files and saved them on a drive with his name and mine and a password only. I knew. Months passed, seasons shifted, the court decision was finalized, the property was officially and irrevocably mine. I received a formal apology letter from the registry office and a short statement from the notary saying he regretted not noticing the irregularities. None of it changed the past, but it was something, a line drawn, a name cleared, a truth restored. Didn't hold a celebration, I didn't post online, I didn't even tell most of the people around me what happened, because this victory wasn't about being seen, it was about being whole. And sometimes wholeness is a quiet thing, like a healed scar or a closed wound you no longer need to explain. Oh, morning, I woke up early, opened every window and let the city air rush in. I stood barefoot in the kitchen with a cup of tea, and I thought about the version of myself that walked away from that house in silence all those months ago, how small she felt, how alone, how broken. And I wished I could tell her everything I know that you will survive this, that you are not what they say you are, that your silence is not weakness, that your pain is real, and still you will say didn't get justice in the way people expect. There was no dramatic confrontation, no jail time, no public disgrace, but I got something else. I got my life back. I got my father's name back. I got to look in the mirror and see someone who chose to stay standing, and that is enough. Thank you for listening to my story with me. Don't forget to follow and subscribe for more revenge, scam, and betrayal stories.